Hello everyone, my name is Viktor Оман. In this tutorial I'm gonna cover how I went about creating this environment. It was created in an afternoon and is made entirely using Megascans 3D assets and materials, with the exception for the terrain. I'll be going over how I made that as well. The first thing I'm gonna do is create the path, or the road, and I'm gonna go for a vehicular type road with clear tire tracks. As with most things in this scene, the process is very simple and it's more about the materials and its presentation that matters rather than the geometry itself. All I'm doing here is making sure the general shape is good and that it tiles well once I start adding some irregularities to it. I'm also making sure it's pretty evenly tessellated so that it can be displaced nicely in Unreal Engine. And I think this looks good, so let's move on to creating the sides. Same thing goes for this model. Very simple, evenly tessellated geometry that has an interesting base shape, while making sure it repeats and tiles nicely. I want the model to go outwards and upwards a bit, allowing me some space to place the dense, highly detailed vegetation and scatter assets near the path. Around this area I'll just use Unreal's terrain, so this will cover that nicely. The reason for not using Unreal's terrain for the entire scene is that this, while adding some challenges, gives me more freedom and options. You could do it both ways, but this is my preferred workflow for scenes like these. When UV mapping these modules, I try and keep them within the 0 to 1 space, and also as a single UV island with no cuts. Right, time to head into Unreal. Alright, so what we have here are the meshes that we just made, and they are completely untextured. So what I want to do now is take a look at the material. I have a master material that I usually use for scenes like these, which allows me to vertex paint and do some cool blending. So let's open up the material and take a look at it. So this really is just a basic vertex blend material. We have this vertex color node here, just red and green channels, and we're doing a multiply and a power here, just intensity and masking power. And the same thing goes for this one. These are the exact same, except I haven't commented this one for clarity. And these are just plugged in to the lerps, which blend the different textures. And same thing here, we just multiply with a vector node here, so we can tint them, and it's pretty much basic stuff here. But there is a small difference here from the most common vertex blend materials, and that is the noise mask here. And basically what this does is it allows me to blend two different textures based on a world position texture. So if I just go in here and start previewing this node, we can see that we have some noise here, and I then multiply that with height mask. So if I preview this, we can see that there's a blend with the texture as well. And this is plugged into the multiplied with the lerp nodes as well. And here we have UV1, 2, and 3, or a grass UV1 and UV2. And that is basically the material, so it's very simple. So I'm just gonna make a new material instance and call it Forest Ground Tutorial. And I'll just assign it here. So right now there is not a lot of blending going on at all. Well, there is no blending going on. So what I want to do is I want to open up the vertex painter here, and I'll set the paint color to white, and I want to paint in the green channel. So I want to get some grass painted in here. So what I'll do first is I'll just do a rough paint job here along the middle, make it a bit irregular here and there, and along the sides like this. And next I'll use the red channel. So what the red channel is the sand. It's a third texture. So I'll just use this to paint along the sides of the grass here. I'm just going very rough now. I'm gonna go in and tweak this later on. Like so. Now I'll increase the brush size and reduce the intensity a bit. Just increase the viewport. And now I'll start removing some color here and there. Make sure to check the green as well. I'll start painting it back in. So something like that. And as I mentioned before, and this might be a bit hard to see, was the noise blend here. So we have the tiling here. So if I just go ahead and play with this, we can see that there's something going on here. And as I said, it might be hard to see, but that is the mask at a very low scale going tiling across the surface. So if we increase the scale, you can see it's very covers pretty much the whole thing. But if I decrease it, we get some nice chunky areas which break up the original texture. So if we set it to maybe around 3.5, 3.9, we get a nice soft blend here between the two materials. I can try just setting a ridiculous value here, so we can set it to 0 and set it to 4. So you can see it's very subtle, but it helps break up the underlying material or texture. So I'm just gonna go in and quickly do some more editing here. I want to break up the grass ever so slightly a bit here in the middle. I'm gonna edit this a bit more once we start tiling the assets up to make sure they tile at least close to the camera. I might add some grass going out here as well. That is good. Alright, so I'm gonna do the same thing for the lips as well. And I have an instance set up here. And I'll go ahead and select it and go into paint mode again. And this time I want to use quite a bit smaller brush, because I'm mainly going to be working with this part here. So I'll make sure the red and green are selected. Now I'm masking in some sand, because I want this to look sort of like a mudslide, as if we're in a sandy area in which pine trees and so on grow very well. So I'm just removing the grass here, right along the under the overhang there, something like that. And I'll just go ahead and make the size a bit smaller and add some grass back in, so it meets the bottom part better, or like the path module there. So that looks good. And I'm also going to remove some of the green here. I'll go over and smooth it out a bit later. It's a bit of going back and forth to get a nice even blend. And that's looking pretty good. So what I'll do now is I'll actually just go ahead and delete this and duplicate this over. Rotate it around to 180 degrees and turn off snapping and just make sure it meets something like that. And I can move it up a bit as well. And that is good. Right, so let's go ahead and tile this up. So since I made it the correct size, I can just use the snap to grid function, and it's gonna tile up nicely. And we also made sure in Maya to to make sure it tiled well, both in the UVs and the actual mesh. So this is a good start. This gives us a lot of room to play with vegetation and so on. So let's go with this. So here behind me I have a couple of assets that I've selected that I will use to dress up the sides here. So I'm gonna start off by taking this one here, and I'll put this on the lips here, on the edges, and I'll simply try and intersect them with the, I'll turn off this snapping mode here. I'll try and intersect them to make it look like there's like rocks poking out of the sand. I'm getting this weird lighting glitch here. There we go. Something like that. And I'll keep adding this, and I could flip it on the others into the negative direction and push it down a little bit. So we just get a few rocks popping out like that, and something like this. And I'll try and keep the spacing a bit more irregular so it doesn't look obviously tiled, so, or not tiled but repetitive. So something like that maybe, and push it up a bit. Starting to look pretty cool. I'll do the same thing on the other side as well. Just take them like that and rotate it around 180 degrees and push it back towards this direction. And just adjust them so that it fits more tightly or snugly. It's already looking way more natural. Right, so with these added, I just want to check it out in the when it's baked. So I'll just hit build. And there we go. So it looks much more even and nice now. So let's continue adding more stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna go with this stump here, and I'll just duplicate this and move down here. Oh, and if you didn't know about this, it's a really nice feature. If you hold down shift while moving something, the camera goes along. It's so handy when you're like placing assets like this. So I'm just gonna place this stump here. I want it to sort of intersect with the lip here, so you can also see the you sort of see the root going all the way down the ground and upwards over the side here. I think something like this could work. And I'm also gonna place this because this is gonna be like our main view for the renders. So I'm gonna place this nice and close to the camera. The camera's gonna be around here. So yeah, and these are not the color values that are from the Megascans library. I've adjusted the material slightly, added more contrast and power and so on. Something like this. And the intersection and so on, that's going to be covered by foliage later on as well. So I'm not too bothered about that. I'm just looking at trying to add some variation and interest in the overall composition here. Because once we, as we saw before, like the baking does a lot of difference, and we're also going to get some trees going along the edges and in front of the sun and so on. So that's going to alter the lighting quite a bit. I also want this stump here on the other side, I think, like rotated slightly. Something like this, and a bit smaller maybe. Probably gonna move these around a bit later on, but just over there maybe? Yeah, and I'll also move this a bit closer to the other stump as well. So let's give that a shot. Okay, so it's looking a lot better. So I think it's about time we start adding some vegetation here and some scatter assets. Actually, let's start with the scatter assets first. That's gonna go on the ground here. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do is make some more real estate for the modes here, so we can more clearly see what we're doing here. So I'm just gonna switch places with the outliner and the modes here. And I'll go ahead and I have some assets here that I've prepared from previous projects. And what I'll do is I'll just select all these branches here. And these are all grabbed from the Megascans website. And I'll get some rocks here as well. And that should be enough for this first pass. And let's just check out the scale. So these branches are way too big. I'll just remove those for now. That is good. Just make sure the density is a bit lower. So try 50 instead of 200. Still too high. Maybe 15. See if that works. It's looking a bit better. Just gonna reduce the density of the rocks as well. Maybe 100 instead. That is good. Right, so what I want to do is I want these mainly on the edges of the road here, because that's probably where they would gather in real life. So because here you're walking and driving and stuff like that, so I mainly want them to be around here. We can already see it blending with the assets we placed there before. And I'll also place some up here on the edges as well. I'll place one or two here in the middle as well. Alright, so let's exit this foliage mode and hit build here and see how it looks once we've got some better lighting going on. But we can already see it's looking way more natural now, and it's gonna be even better once we get some nice tall grass and stuff like that in there, along with some leaves. Actually, before building, I just realized we should add some leaves as well. I have some leaves here already loaded, so I'll just disable everything except those, and I'll go in here. I have some scattered leaves here, and these are also grabbed from the Megascans website. So I'm just gonna reduce the scale ever so slightly on these. Set it to 0.7 up to, yeah, let's see, 0.9 instead. Perfect. Right, so let's just put these here along the sides. Yeah, the lighting, as you can see, is not representative of what you're gonna get later once it's baked. So I'm gonna make this a bit smaller, and I'm actually gonna reduce the scale here as well a little bit more. It's always such a lovely surprise when you bake the lighting. In my experience, it usually turns out better than dynamic lighting, but the only downside, as I just mentioned, is that you have to wait for it. Once you start baking, once you've baked a few times, you start getting an idea for what it's gonna look like once you actually do bake. So you don't have to bake as frequently. You can sort of imagine it beforehand. Look at that, and just a couple of leaves here in the middle as well. I'll just actually make an entire line here and just delete them instead by holding Shift and clicking. Something like that. Okay, so now we can hit bake. Exciting. And boom, look at that. Awesome. Time to add some other types of foliage. So I'm gonna try and find some grass here. I'll start off by disabling all of these. Select, here are some grasses. This one, and I'll use this one as well. And let's see how it looks. I'm gonna reduce the size here to around 40, and the scale is way off here, so I'll set it to, let's say, 0.5 to 1.1 maybe. That looks better. Yep, so let's try that. So I'm gonna start off by painting this middle part here. I'll just paint all across it, and I'll go ahead and, actually the scale might be a little bit off, especially for this middle part here. So I'll set it to 0.5 to 0.85 or something. Yeah, that looks way better. Cool. All right, so I'll just go ahead and paint this entire strip here. It's kind of hard to see now with unbaked lighting, but I'm just trying to keep inside of the this here strip in the middle. And I'll do a quick pass here on the side to make sure it doesn't spill out too much on the dirt here on the sides. Looks good. And I'll go ahead and stamp out some grass here on the sides. And now I can actually increase the size, since it doesn't really matter if it leaks out on the sides. And I'll do a quick erasing pass here. Okay, so now I'll increase the size even more, because I want it to sort of grow more and more the further out to the size you get. So I'll set this to 1.1 and this to 1.35. And check that out. Actually 1.3 could work here on 1.5. Yeah, that should work. I'll just stamp out here. And I don't want it to grow on the stump here, so remove that. And make sure this area around the stump here is nicely covered. I'll try and see which grass it is. There we go, got it. So we can already see that these, you can't see the intersection anymore, and it's gonna look even nicer once we bake it, since it will blend together so much better. There we go. And I'll just paint over here as well and delete some of this so we don't get too much overdraw. If you want to check out overdraw, by the way, you can go to optimization view modes and quad overdraw, and you can see it overdraw. So I'll just stamp out on this side as well. There we go. All right, so let's hit bake and see how this looks. That's looking a lot better. Awesome. So we can see it's intersecting nicely here, or well, actually you can't see the intersection, but it's blending very nicely there. So let's go ahead and add some more types of vegetation here. So I'm looking for something that's a bit taller. So I should have something here. That should work nicely. So I'll select that one and just check it out. Yeah, look at that. So a nice tall grass here. So I'll just place some here and there along in the middle. And just try and get it nicely spaced out. Because it could easily add too much fidelity or noise to the scene if there's too much. So just I'll try and hold my horses here because it's such a nice asset. I love this one. You can see it's really adding some believability to the scene. Because it's very easy to sort of just go with grass and think, yeah, that looks good, and just stop there. But there's so many kinds of vegetations in the wild they don't really think about. So this is the sort of grass where, like, when you're walking in the woods, and if you're afraid of ticks like I am, these are nightmares because they always hang out over the path. So yeah, I'm gonna go with that. I'll delete a couple of these, so there's not too much. There we go. And let's see if there is something else, something taller. So remove those, or not remove them, but I'll choose this one. This is also some higher or taller kind of grass. I'll just increase the scale here. There we go, perfect. Right, so let's just stamp this out here and there. So these are also tall grasses, but as you can see, they're a bit thicker. So I think it's gonna work pretty well with the other types of grass we just added. Be sure to add some here in the distance as well. Even though you can barely see them, it's gonna add some nice silhouette or shapes back there. So remove this one maybe, and like that. So just go back to our main angle here. Because I want it to sort of just feel overgrown, so having stuff here along the sides is gonna really help with that. Especially when we start adding some terrain and like a backdrop to this. So we're gonna add a terrain as well with some trees. So this is just the beginning. So I think this looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and give this a bake. And voila! Awesome. Alright, so before we move any further, I want to go ahead and add a terrain so we have some more context to the scene here. So we're just gonna click the terrain here, or landscape, and I'll set it to, let's see, -100, -500, and let's see where that ends up. So let's try -450. Perfect. And I want to set it to 31. Oh, it ends up over there. Okay, I'll just move this over here and slightly this way as well, so we have some more space to work with. I mainly just want to add some hills and stuff so we can sort of round this in with landscapes. So let's go ahead and hit create here and start painting. So I want to reduce the brush size to, let's see, 3,500. Should do nicely. And let's go ahead and start adding some hills. So you just want to elevate this area around our play area, so to speak. So just, it doesn't have to be pretty. Just make sure it's surrounding your area nicely. Because I always like the kind of woods where it feels like everything's just almost falling over you, like you're in a sort of a crevice with the world just rising around you. Feels very, very epic. And now I'll smooth everything out, increase the brush size to maybe 4,500 instead. We get some broader strokes here. It's really just to get some basic shapes going. So let's jump back in and check this out. So this one should go way down. I'll lower that later. I just want to get the base done here. And I could even, let's see, move this down a little bit, like that. And this should work nicely. I'll just smooth everything out a little bit more, so we get a bit more horizon and sky going. Right, cool. Okay, so let's just go ahead and add this material to the terrain as well. Add that there. Perfect. So this doesn't have to be pretty. It's just most of this is just going to be in shadow. So all we really just want is the color of the grass here, so it blends together nicely. And let's go ahead and start adding some trees here, so we can get some idea of the overhang and the lighting. So I'll add these trees here, this tree, and I have one more tree down here. So let's see what this looks like. I'll reduce the rotation, the max rotation alignment, or what it's called. Let's see here. Align max angle. So I reduce this to 4 maybe. That's better. Because we want some sort of angle, but not too much. And I'll also reduce the density, because it's pretty crazy right now. So set it to maybe 5. That works, perfect. Cool, so I'll just go ahead and surround ourselves with some trees here, all the way around. And I can also increase the scale. So let's check this out. So this is set to 1.2. So set it to 1.4 and 2.2 to get some nice variation going. Get some young trees and some older trees. So set this to 1.2 and 1.35 and start painting these out. Add some trees really close by here, because we want some nice shadow casting over here. And I'll add some trees over here to the horizon as well, and up here on the edge of the ridge here. And now I'll increase the scale to 1.6 and 2 here, and increase this one as well to 1.65 and 2.5. These are the trees that are gonna be more in the distance, so I just want to exaggerate their size a bit. To get some more shadows in here. And I'll increase the density as well to maybe 8 so we can get some more trees in here. And I'll remove this one. It's kind of bugging me. Alright, so starting to get there. Because we can't really see the edge of the terrain here. We're gonna use some smaller bushes as well to cover more up. But I think this is a pretty good start. So let's go ahead and also add a reflection capture here. So we get some subtle reflections here. And I'll just duplicate this up and make it smaller. So 500 maybe. Perfect. Right, so let's go ahead, because now we can see we have some nice shadows going on here. I'll actually go ahead and add a couple more like ridiculously large trees to catch some more shadows. These are gonna be our really old trees. So 2.2 and 3. Our mastodon trees here. Maybe catching a bit too much shadow there. So this is always the tricky part, trying to locate the trees that are casting too much shadow. Because I want some shadow on this part as well. So let's just... Okay, so this area here should be... There we go, perfect. Right, so let's give this a bake and see how it turns out. This is always interesting because we might have to go back and remove some, but we'll see. So let's hit bake here or build. Okay, so it's definitely getting there. We're gonna do quite a bit of color adjustment and lighting adjustments as well later on. Right now, actually, I'm just using a directional light here. That's and a skylight, of course, but that's all I'm using here. So let's go ahead and add some more foliage in here. So what I want is, I really want this to feel sort of overgrown, like a real forest. So I'll go ahead and add some juniper bushes here. These ones, and reduce the size of the brush. So it's a bit too big, but I'll go ahead and use these for the surrounding areas or like bordering here. So I'll set the scale to 4 and 6 and see if I can actually set them to 8 and 10. Just sort of cover up more of the surrounding area, like a backdrop. Cover up the edges here. There we go. And now I'll set them to 1 and 3. I think it's gonna work. Maybe 1 and 2. Perfect. So I'll go ahead and add these around the edges here. Just sort of frame ourselves in here. I'm gonna add some of these there. Perfect. And some more here on the edges to cover up the intersections here. Starting to shape up here. Awesome. All right, and let's see if we have something else. I think I have some ferns. Yep, here are some ferns that I can use as well. So I'll add these sporadically here around the edges. I'll reduce the size a bit as well. They're a bit too big, so 1.2 to 2.2 I think should work well. And let's see if I have something else we can put here. So at this point, it's really just about having fun and seeing what you can find. So I have these sticks here that were too big previously. So I'll go ahead and set the scale to 3 and 5 and see if we can get some sticks in here, like, or large branches. I would say they are, not sticks. And something over here. Cool. So, and one more thing that I'm gonna do is for these trees that I just added, I remember the resolution is probably pretty high, so I'm just gonna check this out. So the resolution, I can set this to 32 for now, just so we get some faster baking. And I'll also select the grass here, set this to 16 instead. It's really just for previewing purposes. So let's go ahead and remove this tree actually, because this one is bothering me as well. So select everything and just click there. There we go. There's really no point for that to be there. Can remove that as well. Just remove anything that doesn't really affect our scene. And there we go. Alright, a little bit cheaper. So let's hit bake. Or build. Alright, so let's check it out. Cool. It's really shaping up here, and that's awesome. And I love these small trees here just sort of bending in. I'm gonna do a lot more tweaking, so I'm gonna go ahead and add more variations here. So I'll see you in a bit. Alright, so I've done quite a bit of tweaking. So I adjusted the size of the trees around here and moved stuff around. And I think it's time to bake now. So, and I also adjusted the terrain a bit in the cut there. But I just kept doing what I did before, just adding grass and other types of foliage, making sure it's layering nicely. So that's one really key thing about working with nature environments that I've learned, is keep in mind layering. Like, don't just go with one size. Like, make sure it's larger in the back, go smaller and smaller, and like these huge trees back here, smaller trees in here, like almost tiny trees here, and large branches up here, and small twigs in here. Making sure you keep in mind where stuff should go. So let's go ahead and just bake this, and let's see where we end up. Okay, so it's really looking nice and dense now. It's looking really cool. So I thought it would be a good time to take a look at the lighting and stuff like that, because right now we've mainly been focusing on the content and not the presentation. And it's the entire lighting is just a directional light. Intensity is at 220 stationary, and it's volumetric. So 4 in volumetric scattering intensity, and it's casting volumetric shadow as well. And there is also a skylight, if I can find it. There we go. And also set to stationary. And it's set to 7 in intensity to get a nice even lighting, sort of like an overcast day. And let's see here if it's, yeah, it's set to 1 in volumetric scattering intensity. And I also have a volumetric height fog. I think, no, it's atmospheric height fog. Exponential height fog, that's the name. And here are the settings for that. So it's 0.01, sort of a blue tint to the in-scattering color. And the volumetric settings, it's first of all, it's enabled, and it's set to 0.4 in scattering distribution. Albedo is slightly tinted blue, I believe. Oh, no, it's actually entirely white. And you can see the settings here. So the settings for this scene and the lighting, it's very, very basic. And we're not using any post-processing at all so far. So, but I have a post-process volume set up here that I will enable and show. So if we enable that, you can see it's a huge difference. We can just go turn it off and let the exposure adjust, and we can turn it back on again. So it's a huge difference, like everything changes, the colors, the shadows, the lighting, the fog changes colors, and so on. So let's just take a quick look at this. So the first thing I've done here is I've changed the white balance temperature. So it's set to 5,800. So it's a bit warmer. If I change colder, I mean. So I can change this. We can see it's a huge difference, just that. So this is a big part of the whole change in the atmosphere. And I'm also using the new color grading in Unreal as of, was it 4.15, I think it is, and it's extremely powerful. So you can check out the settings here. So saturation is 1, contrast 1.15. It's small changes, but it's really making a huge difference. And down here we have the color grading lookup table. I can show you this. So this adjusts the colors, and I made this in Photoshop. So if we turn this off and on again, we can see that also makes a big difference. It desaturates it a bit and also adds a bit more blue to the scene. So the way you create a color lookup table, at least the way I do it, is I just take a screenshot of the scene without any lookup table, of course, at all enabled, and I add the lookup table chart from the website, the documentation for Unreal. And I just add that underneath a bunch of adjustment layers, which I tweak until I am happy with the result. And then I export the lookup table. I set it to color lookup table in the texture group. And then it turns out like this. And let's just take a quick look here. I'm doing quite a bit of adjustments here in the shadows department. So just take a quick look here. Small adjustment to the gamma. And a small adjustment to the offset as well. And I'm changing the midtones ever so slightly as well, the saturation. I'm making it a bit more saturated to give it some more vibrance. So we can set it to, it's a very, very small difference, but you can see it gets warmer, especially on the grass here. I'm pointing at my screen for some reason, but yeah. So if you look here on the grass, and I set it back to 1.1, it gets warmer and more vibrant. And let's check out the highlights as well. So the saturation here, very, very subtle difference, but all these small things each contribute to a big difference. Same thing here, very minor. And here in the tone mapper, I've done some adjustments as well. You can take a look at that. And I've set the bloom to 1.5. just to give some more atmosphere from the fog, just to give the volumetric fog a bit of a boost. But it's nothing too over the top. That's the way I like to work. Like I try and keep things pretty subtle. I usually go pretty over the top to begin with, and then I just work my way down. So let's say I put it like this at first, and then after I've done some more changes, I sort of step it back and find a nice sweet spot, like in between. It's easier to scale back than to scale up, in my experience. Auto exposure, that was also a big thing. So I've set this to 1, 100, and 100. So there's no auto exposure whatsoever in the scene. It's easier for me to work that way. So the exposure doesn't adjust when I look in different areas. Same thing when I do photographs. I like to work with manual settings. Gives me more control and easier to see the result. No lens flares at all, and no depth of field, and very basic. I set the intensity of the ambient occlusion to 0.65 because otherwise I think the grass gets too much occlusion, and if I set it to 0 it gets a bit too little exposure or occlusion. So a nice middle ground here. And global illumination, just default settings, very basic stuff. The main things here that I kept to keep in mind is the white balance, the color gradient lookup table, and tweaking the ambient occlusion. So we can turn it on and off and on again, just to see more clearly. And you can also see the auto exposure doing a lot of work here. So if I turn this back on, boom, we got a very nice result here. And then sky is nicely blue with a sort of a hazy, overcast look. So to recap, what we did was we created a very simple, or two very simple meshes here. So the ground and the sides. We created we took a look at the very basic vertex paint material with a mask, noise mask, which blends the two ground materials together. We started adding some very rough meshes to add some shape, like big shape variations to the terrain or ground and the immediate surroundings. Then we started adding small details, the rocks and the twigs here and there. Then we started working with the small grass in the middle and the sides here, and we worked our way up with bigger and bigger grass on the sides here. Later on we started adding the trees, going from small to large, or working with small and large trees, with the large trees in the background and the small trees or smaller trees here in the middle. And that is a very good workflow, at least for me, to sort of work with the layering from bottom to top, just small to big, and always keeping in mind, try and keep the assets in logical locations. So more leaves and more twigs here on the sides, and mainly just grass here in the middle, and big trees at the back, and small trees here in the middle, and these stumps here. Because in woods in real life, these are mainly the trees that are being cut down to prevent trees from falling over the road or take down sick trees and so on. And then these small trees start growing up. So try and keep that in mind when working on natural environments such as these. And I really hope you learned something from this video, and thank you very much for watching.